I've always been a night owl, but on that particular night, I wish I had just stayed in bed. It was past 2 a.m. when I pulled into the Walmart parking lot. The store's flickering fluorescent lights cast an eerie glow over the nearly empty lot. The giant blue sign loomed above me, buzzing faintly in the silence. A few scattered cars were parked haphazardly, their windows fogged up as if their owners had been sitting inside for too long. Something felt off, but I ignored the gnawing unease in my gut. I needed groceries, and besides, I'd been here late at night before. I grabbed my phone and wallet, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the entrance. As I got closer, the automatic doors shuddered before sliding open with a reluctant hiss. Inside, the air smelled faintly of stale popcorn and something else, something I couldn't quite place. The store was almost empty, aside from a few late-night shoppers and a lone cashier standing motionless behind the register. Then I noticed something strange. Every single aisle had at least one person standing in it. But they weren't shopping. They weren't moving. They were just standing still, staring blankly at the shelves. I swallowed hard and forced myself to ignore it. Probably just exhausted workers or sleep-deprived customers. I pushed my cart forward and headed to the produce section. That's when I saw the first disturbing thing. A woman stood near the bananas, her back to me. Her long, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, reaching past her waist. She was wearing a thin, white nightgown, something no one should be wearing outside in the middle of winter. Excuse me," I muttered, trying to reach past her for some apples. She didn't move. I stepped closer, hesitating. Something about her felt wrong. Her body was too stiff, her arms hanging limply at her sides. My skin prickled. "Miss?" I said, a little louder. Then she turned, and I wish she hadn't. Her face, if you could even call it that, was all wrong. Her mouth was too wide, stretched into an unnatural grin. Her skin was too smooth, like a wax figure's, and her eyes were empty black voids. My breath hitched. My stomach twisted in knots. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over my cart. She just stood there, grinning, her head tilting slightly as if she was studying me. And then, without a sound, she turned back to the bananas. Like nothing had happened. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed to leave. Now. But as I turned down another aisle, I saw something even worse. A little boy stood in front of the cereal boxes. His back was to me, just like the woman's had been. His small frame was stiff, his tiny hands clenched into fists at his sides. Something inside me screamed, "Don't get closer." But I had to. I swallowed hard and stepped forward, and just like before, he turned, his mouth stretched into the same impossible grin. His empty black eyes locked onto mine. And then, in a voice that wasn't his own, he whispered, "You shouldn't be here." A chill crawled up my spine. I turned to run, only to realize that every single person in the store had turned to look at me. Their empty black eyes glowed under the fluorescent lights, their mouths stretched into identical grins. And in eerie unison they whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I didn't hesitate. I turned and sprinted toward the exit, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The wheels of my abandoned shopping cart squeaked as it rolled aimlessly into a nearby shelf, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out. But the second I reached the automatic doors, I slammed into something hard, the glass. It wasn't opening. I slammed my palm against it. The doors stood still, refusing to budge. The outside world, my car, the empty parking lot, the cold night, was right there, just beyond the glass. But it might as well have been 1,000 miles away. Behind me, a chorus of soft whispers filled the air. "You shouldn't be here." My heart pounded. Slowly, I turned around. They were all standing still, every shopper, every frozen figure that had once been staring at the shelves. Now their attention was solely on me. Their faces were stretched in those nightmarish, empty grins. Their black, soulless eyes gleamed under the store's fluorescent lights. The little boy took a step forward, his bare feet slapping against the tile. "Leave," he whispered. I nearly laughed, hysterically, hopelessly. I was trying to. I turned back to the doors, pushing against them with everything I had. But they wouldn't open. It was like they had been sealed shut. I glanced around, searching for another way out. There, the emergency exit. I sprinted toward it, skidding slightly as I rounded the corner. The red emergency exit, alarm will sound sign gleamed invitingly above the metal door. I didn't care about the alarm. I grabbed the handle and pushed. Nothing. I pushed again. The door didn't budge. It was locked. I looked around wildly, my breathing ragged. The store was still eerily silent. The whispers had stopped, but they were still watching me. Then something changed. The store lights flickered, just once, barely noticeable. And when they came back on, the aisles had moved. I gasped, stumbling backward. The Walmart I had entered, the layout I had memorized from countless shopping trips, was gone. The aisles were now warped, twisted, stretching in directions they shouldn't be. What had once been a simple, organized store was now a maze. The cash registers were missing, the produce section was gone, and standing in the middle of the rearranged store was the woman in the white nightgown. Her back was to me again. The little boy was beside her, his tiny hand reaching up to hold hers. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then she turned. This time her grin was wider. And she spoke. "You belong to us now." I stumbled back, my mind screaming for a way out. Think, think, think. I couldn't go through the front doors. I couldn't use the emergency exit. But then I remembered something. The employee area, the back rooms, the stockroom. Maybe there was a door there. It was my only chance. I turned and ran. The aisles twisted around me as I sprinted, the store shifting unnaturally. It was no longer a Walmart. It was something else, something alive. The lights flickered again, and in the brief darkness, I heard them move, not walking, sliding, shifting. I burst into the back section of the store, nearly crashing into a row of industrial shelves. The employees' only door loomed ahead. It was slightly ajar. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the door and threw myself inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the whispers stopped. Everything was quiet. The air in here was different, stale, damp, heavy. It smelled like rotting cardboard and something metallic, something that made my stomach turn. The room was dimly lit, but I could make out rows of metal shelves stacked high with unopened boxes. I pressed my back against the door, trying to slow my breathing. My hands were shaking, my whole body was shaking. I wasn't safe yet. I had to keep moving. I turned and walked deeper into the storage area. The flickering light cast long, distorted shadows across the floor, making the shelves seem taller than they should be. Then, I heard it. A soft click, click, click. Footsteps, but not normal ones. These were too light, too quick, like nails tapping against tile. I froze. The sound was coming from just beyond the shelves. Something was moving in the darkness. Slowly I crouched and peered through a gap between the boxes. At first, I saw nothing. Just stacks of inventory, a few forgotten carts, and the dull gleam of the overhead lights. Then a shadow shifted. Something crawled into view. It was wrong. Its limbs were too long, bending at unnatural angles as it moved. Its head, if it even had one, was small and featureless, just smooth, pale flesh stretching where a face should have been. Its fingers were long, tipped with blackened nails that clicked softly against the floor. It wasn't a person. It wasn't anything I had ever seen before. And then it turned its head toward me. I slapped a hand over my mouth, biting down a scream. It stayed still for a moment, listening. Then it started moving, straight toward me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The creature's elongated fingers scraped against the floor, its joints popping unnaturally as it crawled forward. Its faceless head twitched, as if sniffing the air, searching for something. For me. I pressed my body against the cold metal shelf, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. My hand was still clamped over my mouth, muffling my ragged breaths. Don't make a sound. The storage room was dim, but I could still make out its grotesque form as it slithered between the shelves. Its limbs were grotesquely thin, bending in ways they shouldn't, each movement accompanied by a sickening, wet crack. It stopped just a few feet from my hiding spot. Then it made a sound, a low, clicking noise. I don't know how, but I felt the noise inside my skull. It wasn't just a sound. It was like something scratching at the back of my mind, probing, searching. My stomach twisted. My body screamed at me to run, but I didn't. I stayed frozen, praying that if I remained perfectly still, it would move on. The creature tilted its faceless head, then slowly it raised one of its long, bony hands and reached toward the boxes where I was hiding. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't find me. Please, don't find me. Its fingers hovered just inches from my face. Then, a loud bang echoed through the storage room. The creature jerked its head toward the noise, its body twisting in an unnatural, jerky motion. The clicking noise it made grew sharper, angrier. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I took my chance. I bolted. I heard it shriek behind me, a horrible garbled noise that sent icy spikes of fear through my body. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my feet pounding against the cold concrete floor. There has to be a way out. I tore through the rows of inventory, my eyes darting wildly for anything. A door, a window, an exit sign. And then I saw it. A metal door at the far end of the storage room, slightly ajar. A faint sliver of fluorescent light leaked through the crack. I ran harder, my lungs burning. Behind me, the creature was getting closer. I could hear it, that sickening click, click, click of its nails against the floor, the raspy wheeze of its breath. I reached the door and threw myself through it. I hit the ground hard, my palms scraping against the tile as I landed in a narrow hallway. I scrambled to my feet and spun around, just in time to slam the door shut. A deafening thud shook the metal as the creature rammed against it from the other side. I stumbled back, gasping for air. Silence, then click, click, click. It wasn't giving up. I turned and ran down the hallway. This area of the Walmart wasn't meant for customers. The walls were bare concrete, the floor scuffed and worn. Exposed pipes ran along the ceiling, casting eerie shadows under the flickering fluorescent lights. Where does this hallway lead? I didn't care. As long as it took me away from that thing, I was willing to follow it. The hallway twisted and turned, stretching farther than it should have. The further I went, the stranger it became. The walls weren't bare anymore. They were covered in old, yellowed newspaper clippings. I slowed, my pulse still hammering. My eyes scanned the headlines as I passed. Local Walmart employee missing. Last seen during night shift. Family disappears after late-night shopping trip. No trace found. Walmart store under investigation for strange incidents. Police find nothing. My stomach lurched. The photos attached to the articles were faded, but I could still make out the faces. Blank, smiling faces. Just like the ones I had seen in the aisles. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. That's when I noticed something even worse. Some of the photos had been scratched out. Long, jagged marks had been carved over certain faces, as if something, or someone, had tried to erase them. I didn't understand what I was looking at. And then, just ahead, I saw something even more horrifying. The hallway. Ended. Dead end. No doors. No turns. Just a wall. No, I whispered, my hands shaking. This can't be happening. I turned back the way I came. The hallway wasn't there anymore. In its place was darkness. Not just dim lighting, complete suffocating darkness, a black void that stretched endlessly, swallowing everything. And from that darkness, I heard it. A voice, a whisper. You shouldn't be here. The sound was coming from the void, dozens, maybe hundreds of voices overlapping in a horrible, distorted chorus. Then I saw something move. Figures emerged from the blackness. They stepped forward, their faces still twisted into those awful, unnatural grins. Their eyes, black and empty, locked onto me. The little boy was in front. His small hand lifted. He pointed at me, and behind him, the faceless thing crawled forward, its elongated fingers twitching. I pressed myself against the dead-end wall, my breath coming in frantic gasps. There's nowhere to go. The voices grew louder, the darkness swallowed more of the hallway. I closed my eyes, and then the wall behind me gave way. I fell backward into the unknown. I plunged backward, swallowed by the darkness. The world around me twisted as I fell, not down, not up, but in every direction at once. My stomach lurched violently, and for a moment I felt weightless, suspended in nothingness. Then I hit the ground, hard. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs. My vision blurred, my limbs screaming in pain as I lay sprawled on a freezing solid surface. For a moment I didn't move. My ears were ringing, my head pounding. Then I opened my eyes, and I wished I hadn't. I wasn't in the Walmart anymore, at least not the Walmart I knew. The space around me was enormous, stretching infinitely in all directions, an impossible underground version of the store. The ceiling was impossibly high, its fluorescent lights flickering like dying stars. The aisles stretched endlessly, towering over me like walls in a maze. But something was wrong. There were no products on the shelves. Instead, the aisles were filled with things. Not items, not groceries. People. Or what was left of them. Figures stood motionless inside the aisles, pressed between the empty shelves. Their bodies were rigid, contorted into unnatural poses. Some were wedged into tiny gaps, their faces frozen in silent screams. Others were slumped over shopping carts, their hands still gripping the handles. Every single one of them had the same wide, stretched-out grin, the same black, empty eyes. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling beneath me. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something metallic, something that smelled like blood. I turned slowly, my heart hammering. There was no entrance, no doors, no checkout lanes, just endless empty aisles stretching into the distance, filled with grinning, lifeless figures. I wasn't supposed to be here. Then the overhead speakers crackled to life. A distorted voice rang out, flat and robotic. "Attention, shoppers. The store is now closing. Please proceed to the nearest exit." Nearest exit. I had to find it. I forced my feet to move, stepping cautiously between the frozen bodies in the aisles. Their faces were blurred, their expressions twisted into something almost inhuman. Then, as I passed one of them, it moved. A soft twitch. I saw it. A woman, her body wedged between the shelves, her wide grin stretching even wider. Her black eyes snapped to me. I stumbled backward, choking on a scream. My body slammed into a shopping cart, sending it rolling down the aisle. Then the others started moving too. The frozen figures twitched, their heads snapping toward me in eerie, unnatural jerks. Their grins grew wider, their eyes locked onto me. Then, all at once, they stepped forward. I ran. The figures shuddered to life, their movements unnatural, jerky, like puppets being controlled by unseen strings. Their arms flailed, their joints cracking as they lunged toward me. The aisle twisted as I ran. I turned a corner only to find another endless stretch of shelves. No way out. The speakers crackled again. "Attention, shoppers. The store is now closing. Please proceed to the nearest exit." I kept running, weaving through the aisles, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then, in the distance, I saw something. A red glow. It flickered dimly, barely visible through the towering shelves. But it was something. I sprinted toward it. Behind me, the grinning figures followed. Their footsteps were uneven, dragging, but fast. They were closing in. I rounded another corner, and there it was. A red exit sign, glowing faintly above a heavy metal door. Salvation. I lunged for it, my fingers grasping the cold handle. I pulled, but it didn't budge. Locked. "No, no, no," I gasped, frantically yanking the handle. The figures were right behind me. I turned, pressing my back against the door. The nearest one, a man in a tattered Walmart uniform, stood inches away, his grin unnaturally wide. His jaw was stretched too far, as if something had unhinged it from the inside. His black eyes stared through me. Then he whispered, "You belong here," I screamed. At that moment, the door behind me burst open. A hand grabbed me, yanking me inside. The door slammed shut just as the figures lunged. Darkness swallowed everything. I fell to the ground, gasping for breath. My entire body trembled, my heart slamming against my ribs. For a moment, I couldn't see anything. Then, a flashlight clicked on. The beam of light illuminated the small space around me. I wasn't alone. A man stood in front of me, holding the flashlight. He looked disheveled, his Walmart uniform wrinkled and stained. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. He crouched down, gripping my shoulders. "You're lucky I found you," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, urgent. They almost took you. I swallowed hard, my breath still shaky. Wh- what is this place? What's happening? The man glanced nervously at the door. You went too deep, he muttered. You never should have come here. I shook my head, my pulse still racing. I don't understand. He grabbed my arm. There's no time, he said. We have to move before they find us again. I hesitated. Before what finds us? The man's face darkened. He swallowed hard, then whispered, The things that run this store. The man's grip on my arm was tight, almost too tight. His fingers dug into my skin as he pulled me away from the door, deeper into the dark room. We can't stay here, he whispered. His flashlight flickered slightly, casting shaky beams of light across the small space. I swallowed hard, still gasping for breath. My body was trembling, my legs weak beneath me. Too deep. He said I went too deep. What the hell is this place? I asked, my voice barely steady. The man didn't answer immediately. He moved quickly, grabbing something from a nearby shelf. I looked around, realizing we were in what seemed like an employee break room. But everything was wrong. The walls were covered in old, faded Walmart posters, their colors drained, their slogans eerily outdated. A whiteboard hung near the entrance, but the writing on it was smudged and unreadable. The fluorescent lights above us flickered weakly, buzzing like dying flies. And the worst part, there were rows of employee lockers lining the walls, but they weren't normal lockers. They were shaking. Not violently, but subtly, like something was inside them. Something breathing. I felt bile rise in my throat. What? What's in those? The man's expression hardened. Don't look at them, he muttered. He grabbed my wrist again and led me toward a small side door at the back of the room. It looked old, rusted, as if it hadn't been used in decades. He reached for the handle, but I yanked my arm free. No, I said, my breath still heavy. Not until you tell me what the hell is going on. The man hesitated. He glanced at the door we had come through, then at the shaking lockers. Finally, he sighed. You shouldn't have come here, he said. No one should be here. Not after hours. I frowned. After hours? He nodded. This Walmart. It changes when the doors lock. When it's daytime, it's just a store. But at night, it's something else, something alive. My stomach twisted. That thing that was chasing me, I whispered. There's more than just that thing, the man said quickly. You saw them, didn't you? The smiling ones. I nodded. He swallowed. They used to be people. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Customers? I asked. He shook his head. Employees. I blinked. What? He pointed at the lockers. That's what happens to us, the night shift employees. We don't leave. We can't leave. The longer you stay here, the more you become part of it. First, your shift gets longer. Then you forget what time it is. Then one day, you realize you've been here for years. I stared at him in horror. That's insane, I muttered. Is it? He shot back. How long have you been here? I opened my mouth to respond, then stopped. My stomach twisted. I wasn't sure. It had been late when I entered the Walmart. The store had been nearly empty. But now, there were no windows, no clocks. I had no idea how long I had been running, hiding, fighting to survive. A lump formed in my throat. The man nodded. Exactly. This place doesn't want you to leave. It warps time. It keeps you trapped. My hands clenched into fists. No, I said, shaking my head. There's always a way out. The man sighed. Maybe, but not through the front doors. Not anymore. I frowned. Then where? He motioned to the rusted side door he had been leading me toward. There's another way. Through the employee-only sections. They go deeper than the store above. I hesitated. Deeper? The man's face darkened. We don't have a choice. A sudden noise made us both jump, a loud metallic clang. It came from the lockers. Then, a voice. Help me. My blood ran cold. The voice was muffled, coming from inside one of the lockers. It sounded weak, desperate. The man grabbed my arm. Don't listen, he whispered. I looked at the lockers. They were shaking harder now. Please, let me out. Another voice. A different one. I swallowed hard. Who are they? The man tightened his grip. They're what's left of the old employees. My chest tightened. We have to help them. No, the man snapped. They're not people anymore. I looked at him. His expression was grave, filled with something I couldn't quite place. Fear. Before I could say anything else, the lockers exploded open. Dozens of figures tumbled out, landing in twisted heaps on the floor. I screamed, stumbling backward. Their bodies were broken, their limbs bent at unnatural angles. Their uniforms were rotted, covered in mold and dust. Their heads twitched, jerking violently. Then they started crawling toward us. Their faces were frozen in grins. I backed away, my heart hammering. The man yanked the side door open. "Run!" he shouted. I didn't hesitate. I bolted through the door just as the grinning employees lunged forward. The man slammed the door behind us, twisting the rusted lock. The things on the other side let out inhuman screeches, pounding against the metal, their grins stretching too wide. My breath came in sharp gasps as I turned to look at where we were now. My stomach dropped. We were in another hallway, but this one was worse. The walls weren't normal. They were made of pale, fleshy material, pulsing like veins under the glow of flickering light bulbs. The air smelled rotten. A deep hum filled the air, vibrating in my chest. The man exhaled shakily. "We're close," he whispered. I swallowed hard. "Close to what?" The man turned to me, his face pale. "The manager's office." His hands trembled as he stepped forward. "And that's where we'll find out the truth." The hallway breathed. The fleshy walls contracted and expanded as if the building itself was alive. The pulsing veins running along the surface throbbed with an unsettling rhythm, a slow, wet beat that made my stomach churn. I swallowed hard, stepping carefully behind the man. "This isn't real," I muttered, my voice shaking. "This can't be real." The man didn't respond. He moved forward cautiously, gripping his flashlight tightly. The dim beam flickered against the grotesque walls, revealing grooves in the pulsing flesh, grooves that looked like faint handprints, as if people had once tried to claw their way out. My breath came in ragged gasps. "Why does it look like this?" I whispered. The man stopped, glancing over his shoulder. "Because this place is alive. It's not just a store. It's something else, something old. And the deeper you go, the worse it gets." A chill crawled down my spine. We kept walking, the wet squelch of our footsteps echoing in the unnatural corridor. The air was heavy, thick with a smell that reminded me of rotting meat. Then, ahead of us, a door, black, sleek, unnatural. Unlike the fleshy walls, this door was perfectly smooth, as if it didn't belong here. A single nameplate was attached to it, rusted and smeared with something dark. I stepped closer, squinting at the letters. "Store manager." I exhaled shakily. "Is this it?" The man nodded, gripping the handle. His hands were trembling. "We need answers," he whispered. I swallowed hard. Every part of me screamed not to go inside, but what choice did I have? The man twisted the handle, the door swung open, and what I saw inside shouldn't have existed. It wasn't an office, it was a cathedral. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, disappearing into shadows. The walls were lined with towering shelves, filled with things that weren't products. Mummified corpses dressed in Walmart uniforms, their faces preserved in eternal grins. And at the very center of the room, a desk, but not a normal one. It was massive, carved from something that looked like bone. Behind it sat a figure, motionless, hunched over. The manager. The man beside me inhaled sharply. Oh God. The manager wasn't human. His body was twisted, stretched beyond recognition. His arms were too long, his fingers bony and cracked. His face was wrong. His skin was pulled too tightly over his skull, his mouth stretched into a permanent, horrifying grin. His eyes were sunken, black pits that dripped with some kind of thick, ink-like substance, and then, without warning, he moved. His head jerked upward with a sickening crack. His grinning mouth twitched. Then he spoke. His voice was deep, layered, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. "You're late for your shift." My breath caught in my throat. The man beside me took a shaky step forward. We're not employees," he stammered. The manager let out a low, guttural chuckle. "You are now." Then, the walls began to shift. The shelves rumbled, their contents tumbling to the ground. The corpses twitched, their dried, withered hands clawing at the air. The manager stood up. He was tall, too tall, his elongated limbs bending at impossible angles. His black eyes locked onto me, and his grin widened. "All employees must follow store policy," he said slowly, his voice vibrating through the air. I took a step back. What? What does that mean? The manager's head tilted, his neck bones popping with each unnatural movement. Then he pointed. I followed his gaze, and my stomach dropped. At the far end of the room, an old TV screen flickered to life. The static buzzed for a moment before an employee training video started playing. But the people in the video weren't people. They were the grinning things. Their mouths were stretched wide as they stood in front of shelves, organizing nothing, their movements robotic. A cheerful narrator's voice rang out, painfully upbeat. "Welcome to your first day at Walmart. As a new employee, it's important to follow all rules." The screen flickered. Suddenly, a new image appeared. A list of rules. But as I read them, my hands went cold. Store employee policy. Once you start your shift, you cannot leave. Always smile. Do not look at the customers for too long. If they look back, turn away. If you hear your own voice over the intercom, ignore it. It's not you. If the manager calls you into his office, do not refuse. Do not ask how long you have worked here. You don't want to know. If an employee goes missing, forget them. They are part of the store now. Always, always follow the rules. I felt my breath catch. "This is a joke, right?" I whispered. The manager let out a deep, rattling laugh. "Welcome to the team." Then, the room exploded into chaos. The corpses lunged from the shelves, their grins splitting wider as they screeched and crawled toward us. The man grabbed my arm. "Run!" I didn't hesitate. We bolted toward the door, dodging the grinning bodies as they reached for us. The manager's laughter echoed behind us, growing louder, distorted, unnatural. The fleshy walls twisted and pulsed as if the building itself was alive, responding to our fear. We reached the hallway and slammed the door behind us. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. The man turned to me, his face pale. "We need to get out of here," he whispered. I nodded. "How?" He swallowed. "There's only one way," he said. "We have to go deeper." My blood ran cold. I wanted to protest. I wanted to say no. There had to be another way. But then, the manager's voice rang through the intercom, echoing through the halls. "All employees to the sales floor. Your shift is not over." The walls shuddered, and I knew we were running out of time. The manager's voice echoed through the twisted halls, vibrating in my bones. "All employees to the sales floor. Your shift is not over." The walls pulsed, reacting to his words, and a deep rhythmic hum filled the air. The sound felt like it was coming from inside my own skull, a low, vibrating chant that made my skin crawl. I turned to the man beside me, my breath still ragged. "What does he mean?" I whispered. "Why does he keep calling us employees?" The man's face was grim. "Because that's how it starts," he said quietly. "First, you're just a visitor. Then you're an employee. Then—" He swallowed. "You forget you were ever anything else." A shudder ran down my spine. "No," I muttered. "That's not going to happen to us." The man exhaled shakily. "Not if we get out first." He turned, motioning for me to follow, and we took off down the hallway. The walls bulged, the fleshy material pressing inward like giant hands trying to squeeze us into place. The smell of rot and bleach filled my nose, burning my sinuses. And then, a horrible wailing filled the air. I turned, heart hammering. Behind us, figures were emerging from the shadows. The employees. Their twisted bodies jerked and spasmed as they crawled toward us, their movements unnatural, like puppets on broken strings. Their uniforms were stained and tattered, their name tags covered in something dark and crusted. Their mouths were frozen in wide grins, and their eyes were empty. Black pits. Hollow. Dead. "Move!" the man shouted. I didn't need to be told twice. We ran, sprinting down the endless corridor as the grinning employees skittered after us on all fours, their bones cracking with every movement. The hallway twisted, shifting like a living thing. I glanced behind us. The creatures were gaining. There, the man yelled. I turned my head and saw it, a stairwell at the far end of the corridor. Unlike the pulsating walls around us, the door to the stairs looked normal, steel, with a push bar. A way out. We sprinted toward it, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. The moment we reached the door, the man slammed his shoulder into it. It burst open and we stumbled through, nearly tumbling down the concrete stairs. I grabbed the railing to steady myself as the man kicked the door shut behind us. The second it closed, the wailing outside stopped. Silence. A heavy, unnatural silence. I swallowed hard, pressing my ear to the metal. Nothing. No scratching, no pounding, no voices, just stillness. The man exhaled. We lost them. I turned and took in our new surroundings. A stairwell, normal, concrete. No pulsating walls, no impossible structures, just plain stairs leading downward. A simple sign was bolted to the wall. Lower levels, employees only. I shivered. Why are we going deeper? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Shouldn't we be trying to go up? The man shook his head. The front doors won't open. The manager made sure of that. He motioned toward the descending staircase. The only way out is through the lower levels. There's another exit down there. I hesitated. Something about going down felt wrong. The air was heavier here, thicker, like something was waiting. But what choice did I have? I took a breath and followed him down. The lower levels were not a basement. They were something else. As we descended, the air grew colder, thick with the scent of dust, decay, and something metallic. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly, casting sickly yellow glows over the endless rows of metal shelving units. It looked like a warehouse, but everything about it was wrong. The shelves stretched too high, disappearing into darkness. The aisles twisted at unnatural angles, turning the space into a labyrinth. Some shelves were filled with rotting products, mold-covered boxes of cereal, soda cans leaking black liquid, toy packages filled with moving things. And some shelves were filled with people. I stopped in my tracks, my blood running cold. There, slumped against the shelves, were employees. Or what was left of them. Some were motionless, their uniforms blended into the shelves, as if they had been part of the store for centuries. Others were still breathing, but barely, their eyes sunken, their bodies thin, their hands weakly trying to organize the empty shelves in silent, desperate obedience. The man beside me clenched his jaw. "Don't stop," he murmured. "Don't look at them too long. We need to keep moving." I forced myself to look away. We moved deeper into the endless warehouse, our footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The overhead lights flickered faster now, almost like they were trying to send a message. Then, a sound. A distant buzzing. I turned my head toward it, my pulse spiking. At the far end of the warehouse, something was moving. Not crawling, not jerking. Walking. Tall, deliberate. And then I saw it. A figure, far too large, its silhouette blocking the light as it stepped into view. Its limbs were long and unnatural, its frame towering over the shelves, and in its massive, bony hand, it held a clipboard. My stomach turned to ice. The supervisor. The figure tilted its head as it spotted us. Then, in a voice so deep it rattled my ribs, it spoke, "Are you scheduled for overtime?" My breath caught in my throat. The man beside me froze. Then, without another word, he grabbed my arm and ran. The supervisor let out a horrific, droning sound, like an alarm mixed with a dying animal's wail. The entire warehouse came to life. The grinning employees, slumped against the shelves, jerked upright. The twisted, forgotten workers turned their heads toward us in perfect unison, their hollow eyes locked onto us. And then, they charged. I screamed, sprinting down the aisles as the supervisor's shadow loomed over us, its massive steps shaking the ground. "Faster!" the man yelled. We rounded a corner, dodging past aisles filled with dead products, racing toward something, anything. And then, I saw it. At the very end of the warehouse, half hidden by towering metal shelves, a door, a massive metal exit. Our way out. The man grabbed my wrist. "That's it," he shouted, but behind us, the supervisor was gaining, and I knew if we didn't reach that door in time, we'd never leave. The supervisor's footsteps were thunderous, shaking the metal shelves as it pursued us. "Are you scheduled for overtime?" The monstrous voice boomed, echoing off the cavernous walls of the endless warehouse. Behind us, the grinning employees skittered forward, their movements jerky and unnatural, their hollow eyes locked onto us with inhuman focus. I ran like my life depended on it, because it did. The man beside me gripped my wrist, yanking me forward as we tore down the aisle. The exit door loomed ahead, a massive steel rectangle marked with a glowing red emergency exit sign. It was our only way out. But then, a siren blared, the entire warehouse shuddered, and the moment we reached the door, the emergency sign flickered, then turned black. The door vanished. 1 second, it was there. The next, it was just gone. Nothing but a blank, endless stretch of the warehouse. I skidded to a halt, my breath hitching. "No," I whispered, my hands shaking. "No, no, no." The man cursed under his breath, spinning around just in time to see the supervisor closing in. Its towering frame cast a long, stretching shadow across the warehouse floor. It moved with terrifying slowness, its elongated fingers twitching against the clipboard it clutched in one massive hand. It lifted the clipboard to its eyeless face and pretended to read it. "Overtime approved." Then it lunged. I screamed. The man grabbed my arm and yanked me sideways, dragging me through a narrow gap between two shelves. I could feel the supervisor's fingers swiping at the air behind me, barely missing my back. We stumbled forward, crashing through the cluttered aisle, knocking over rusted shopping carts and rotting boxes of forgotten merchandise. Then, a door. Not the exit we had been running toward, this one was small, a chipped wooden door with a sign above it that read, "Break Room." The man didn't hesitate. He grabbed the handle, threw it open and shoved me inside. I barely had time to turn around before he slammed it shut behind us. Darkness. A suffocating, unnatural silence. I panted, pressing my back against the cold wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. The only sound in the room was our ragged breathing. The man locked the door, then turned to me. His face was pale, his eyes wide with something close to fear. "We're not safe," he whispered. "Not yet." I swallowed hard and forced myself to look around. The break room was wrong. It looked normal at first, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, cracked linoleum flooring, a few scuffed plastic chairs surrounding a cheap break table. A vending machine hummed softly in the corner, its glass covered in grime. But then I noticed the clock on the wall. It wasn't moving. The hands were stuck at 12:01, motionless, as if time had stopped in this place. And then I saw the mirror. A long rectangular mirror stretched across the back wall, reflecting the room in eerie detail. But something was off. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. In the reflection, the room was empty. No me, no man, just an abandoned, hollow space. I turned to the man, my voice shaky. "Do you see that?" He nodded grimly. "I told you," he murmured. "This place, it doesn't follow the rules of the real world." I swallowed, my throat dry. Then, a creak. We both froze. The locker in the corner of the break room shifted slightly, as if something inside it had just moved. I took an instinctive step back. The man tensed. Slowly he reached into his pocket and pulled out a box cutter. The blade clicked open with a sharp metallic sound. We stared at the locker, silence. Then, bang! The locker rattled violently, as if something inside was slamming against the metal. My breath hitched. Another bang. Then, a voice, a whispering, trembling voice. Help me." My stomach turned to ice. The man's grip on the box cutter tightened. Another whisper, weaker this time. "Please, don't leave me." Something about that voice sent every instinct in my body screaming. It wasn't right. It sounded warped, distorted, stretched, as if it wasn't coming from a human throat. The man must have sensed it too. He took a step forward, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I whispered. His jaw tightened. "Please," the voice whimpered. Then, the locker door bent outward. Something inside it pressed against the thin metal, its shape shifting unnaturally, bulging and contracting like a living thing. The man and I stumbled back, our hearts pounding. Then, in a sudden, horrible motion, the locker split open, and the thing inside crawled out. A hand first, grey, stretched too long, the fingers bending backward, then a head, twisted, grinning, its face stretched like melting wax. Then, the rest of it. It wasn't a person. It was something pretending to be. Its bones cracked as it moved, its eyes hollow, smiling mouth twitching. It let out a ragged, choking sound, like it was trying to breathe. Then it spoke. And when it did, my blood ran cold. Because it spoke in my own voice. "You can't leave." I choked back a scream. The man grabbed my wrist. "Run." The thing lurched forward, its two long arms reaching for me, its fingers bending at unnatural angles. We ripped the door open and sprinted back into the warehouse, my pulse thundering in my ears. Behind us, the break room door slammed shut on its own. A low mechanical humming filled the air. And then, the intercom crackled to life. "Break time is over. Please return to your assigned departments." I shuddered. The man turned to me, his face pale. "We're running out of time," he whispered. "We need to find the real exit." I nodded, swallowing hard. But in the pit of my stomach I knew the store wasn't going to let us go easily. The intercom's distorted voice rang in my ears. "Break time is over. Please return to your assigned departments." The store was watching us. The supervisor was still out there hunting. The grinning employees had turned their hollow eyes toward us, their heads twitching unnaturally. We had nowhere to go. The man grabbed my wrist. "We can't stay here." I nodded, my breath shaking. "Where do we go?" He looked around quickly, scanning the endless warehouse of metal shelves and rotting products. Then he spotted something. "There," he whispered, pointing. At the far end of the warehouse, past the flickering fluorescent lights, was an open aisle, leading deeper into the store. The sign hanging above it was covered in dust, but I could barely make out the faded words, "Aisle 0, employees only." A chill ran down my spine. "Does that lead to an exit?" I asked. The man hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted, "but it's better than waiting here." We took off running. Behind us, the grinning employees twitched violently, their heads jerking toward us in unnatural unison. Then, they moved. They didn't chase us like normal people, they glided. Their feet never touched the floor, they just floated forward, their jaws unhinging, their smiles growing wider and wider until their faces split open like gaping wounds. I ran faster. The aisle 0 sign loomed overhead, its letters flickering weakly. We rushed past the threshold, and everything changed. The moment we entered aisle 0, the air shifted. The warehouse was gone. The buzzing fluorescent lights faded into darkness. The tall metal shelves vanished. Instead, we were surrounded by tall, rotting bookshelves, stretching into the darkness like a forgotten library of the damned. The floor beneath us was old, cracked tile, smeared with what looked like dirty handprints. The overhead lights were dim, casting a sickly orange glow over the endless aisles. And the smell. A horrible mixture of old paper, dust, and something rotten. My stomach twisted. "What is this place?" The man shook his head. "I don't know. I've never been here before." I turned, looking behind us. The entrance we had just come through. Gone. Only endless aisles of decaying bookshelves remained. I swallowed hard. "I don't think we're in the store anymore." The man didn't respond. He was staring at something further down the aisle. I followed his gaze. There, half hidden in the dim light, stood a figure. A tall, thin man in an old Walmart vest, his name tag smeared beyond recognition. He wasn't moving. He just stood there, deep in the shadows, his head slightly tilted, watching us. Something about him felt wrong. He wasn't like the grinning employees. He was different, older, forgotten. The man beside me took a slow step back. "We should go," he whispered. I didn't argue. We turned and moved deeper into the aisles, our footsteps barely making a sound on the grimy tile. The bookshelves stretched impossibly high, their contents covered in thick layers of dust. Some books looked ancient, their covers cracked and peeling. Others looked new, as if they had just been placed there. I reached out and brushed the spine of one. The moment my fingers touched it, a whispering voice filled my head. 100 voices. Soft, distant, pleading. I ripped my hand away, the whispers stopped. My heart pounded. What the hell was that? The man gave me a warning look. Don't touch anything. I nodded quickly. We moved forward, deeper into the Isle of the Forgotten, the bookshelves towering around us like silent sentinels. Then, a flickering light ahead. A door. Unlike the decaying bookshelves and grimy floors, this door looked new. Modern. A grey metal door with a push bar, like something you'd find in a normal department store. My pulse quickened. Is that it? I whispered. The exit? The man didn't answer. He just walked toward it. I followed. We reached the door and I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the cold metal handle. Something didn't feel right, but before I could say anything, the door swung open on its own. Inside was a perfectly clean break room. Bright fluorescent lights, fresh coffee brewing, a vending machine stocked with brand new snacks. And inside, employees. But not the twisted, grinning ones. These employees looked normal. They sat at the break table, sipping coffee, chatting quietly. A woman in a Walmart uniform laughed softly at something her coworker said. A man flipped through a newspaper. The moment we stepped inside, they all turned to look at us. Their expressions were not friendly. I felt the air grow heavy. Something was wrong. One of the employees, a woman with tired eyes and a frozen smile, spoke first. You shouldn't be here. The break room door slammed shut behind us. I jumped, my heart hammering. The employees stood up in unison, their expressions blank. The woman took a step forward. You're not scheduled for this shift. Her voice was too calm, too rehearsed. I swallowed hard. We're just trying to leave. The employees stared. Then, in perfect unison, they smiled. Not the wide, unnatural grins of the other employees. This smile was subtle, controlled, and somehow worse. The woman gestured toward the table. Have a seat, she said. The man beside me tensed. I could see it in his eyes. He knew. We couldn't leave this room. The employees weren't going to let us. I turned my head slightly, scanning the room for any possible exit. Then, I saw it. A second door on the far side of the room. Smaller, less noticeable. A staff-only sign hung above it. The woman stepped closer. Have a seat, she repeated, her voice firmer this time. We had seconds to decide, and then the man grabbed my wrist. Run. We lunged for the staff-only door. The employees screamed. The moment we touched the door handle, the lights exploded. The room was plunged into darkness. I felt the man's grip tighten. Go. I shoved the door open, and we fell through. Fell into something else. Something far worse. And before I could even scream, the door vanished. We hit the ground hard. I gasped as I landed on the cold, sticky floor, the impact rattling my bones. The man beside me groaned, pushing himself up, his hands coated in something dark and wet. I didn't want to know what it was. We were in another room, a storage area. The walls were lined with towering metal shelves, stacked high with forgotten products. Dusty, outdated food, broken appliances, boxes labeled with dates from decades ago. Some of them were rotting, their cardboard sagging under the weight of unseen decay. The fluorescent lights above us flickered, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. The air was thick, damp, and smelled of old meat and mildew. The break room was gone. The employees? Gone. The door we had run through? Nowhere to be seen. I turned in a slow circle, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Where the hell are we now? The man wiped his hands on his jacket, his face grim. Deep in the store, he muttered. Too deep. I swallowed. Is there another exit? He didn't answer. That wasn't a good sign. The only way forward was a narrow path between the shelves, leading into the darkness beyond the flickering lights. The store was forcing us forward. I clenched my fists and took a step. My shoes stuck to the floor slightly, as if something had dried there long ago. I didn't think about it. I just kept moving. The man followed. The deeper we walked, the colder it got. The buzzing of the overhead lights became muffled, like we were sinking underwater. My ears rang, my breath fogged in the chilled air. Then, a sound, a low shuffling noise. I froze. It came from ahead, deeper in the storage area, beyond the rows of shelves stacked with forgotten merchandise. Something was moving in here with us. The man grabbed my arm, pulling me toward one of the shelves. Get down. I didn't argue. We crouched behind a stack of old cereal boxes, peering through the gaps in the shelves. The sound grew louder, a heavy, dragging noise like something being pulled across the floor. Then, a shape emerged from the darkness. My stomach twisted. It was an employee. Or, it used to be. Its uniform was ancient, the blue vest faded and torn, the Walmart logo nearly erased with time. Its skin was grey, its limbs too long, its fingers scraping the floor as it moved. And its face, God. Its face was gone, just smooth, stretched skin, pulled tight over an empty skull. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Yet somehow I knew it could see us. It stopped, its head twitched. Then, it sniffed the air. I bit my lip, forcing myself to stay completely still. The man beside me didn't move an inch. The thing let out a wet, gurgling sound, like it was trying to breathe through a throat full of liquid. Then, it turned its head toward us. I stopped breathing. It knew we were here. The man tensed. I saw his fingers inch toward his pocket, where his box cutter was still tucked away. The thing let out another shuddering breath. Then it lurched forward, straight toward us. The man grabbed my arm. "Run!" We burst from our hiding spot, knocking over a stack of rotting food containers as we tore down the aisle. The thing shrieked, a horrible, inhuman wail, like 1,000 voices crying out at once. Then it chased us. It moved too fast, its elongated limbs skittering across the floor, its body jerking violently with each step. I ran blindly, my heart hammering, my lungs burning. The shelves around us blurred as we sprinted through the endless maze of storage. Then, a door, a massive rusted metal door at the end of the aisle, marked with a faded sign. I couldn't read it. I didn't care. I slammed into it full force, grabbing the handle. It wouldn't budge. I yanked harder. "No, no, no." The man grabbed my shoulder, shoving me aside. He lifted his box cutter, jammed the blade into the rusted lock, and twisted. A loud snap. The lock broke. The door swung open, and we fell through. We landed on cold concrete. The door slammed shut behind us. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. We were in a long hallway, narrow, sterile, lit by dim, flickering overhead lights. My skin crawled. This wasn't part of the store. This was something else. The man stood, his hands still shaking. "We're in the back rooms," he murmured. "The real ones." I swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed. At the end of the hallway, there was a single door. Unlike the others, this one was clean. New. A bright white door with no markings. And behind it, I swear I could hear something breathing. The man exhaled slowly. "That's it," he whispered. I hesitated. Somehow I knew, whatever was behind that door, it wasn't going to let us leave. But we had no choice. I nodded, and together, we started walking toward it. The hallway stretched before us, eerily silent. The flickering overhead lights buzzed softly, casting long, trembling shadows against the sterile white walls. The door at the end loomed ahead, perfectly clean, untouched by the decay and grime that covered everything else in this cursed place. I felt uneasy. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but there was nowhere else to go. The man beside me exhaled slowly. His hands were still shaking from our escape, his box cutter gripped tightly in his fist. He wasn't saying it out loud, but I knew he was just as scared as I was. We walked forward, our footsteps echoing unnaturally down the hallway. Then, just as we reached the white door, I hesitated. There was something wrong about it. Unlike every other door we had encountered, rusted, broken, ancient, this one looked brand new, pristine, as if someone had placed it here on purpose. I turned to the man. "Are we sure about this?" His jaw tightened. "No," he admitted, "but we don't have a choice." He reached out, gripped the handle, turned it. Click. The door swung open. Inside was a room, not an office, not a storage space, just a room. It was small, completely empty, with walls as white as the door itself. The ceiling was impossibly high, vanishing into a grey haze. The floor was covered in smooth white tiles, spotless and polished like glass. No furniture, no decorations, no signs of life, just emptiness. The man stepped inside first, his movements tense. I followed, my skin crawling. The moment we were both inside, the door shut behind us. I spun around, grabbing for the handle. It was gone. My breath hitched. No, no, no. I pressed my hands against the wall, feeling for any cracks, any seams. Nothing. The door had simply vanished. I turned back to the man, panic rising in my chest. What the hell is this? He didn't answer. He was staring at the far wall. At first, I didn't understand why. Then, I saw it. A mirror, a massive floor-to-ceiling mirror stretching across the entire far wall. And in it, I saw us. Or at least, I thought I did. The reflection was off. The room in the mirror looked the same. The white walls, the empty space, the too smooth floor. But our reflections weren't right. The man in the mirror, his expression was too blank. His face was too still. And then, he smiled. A slow, unnatural grin that spread too wide, stretching his lips beyond what should be humanly possible. I felt ice pour through my veins. I turned to the man beside me. His face was still, expressionless. He wasn't smiling, only his reflection was. I grabbed his arm. Do you see that? His eyes darkened. Yeah. Then, the mirror flickered, like a glitch in a video. For a split second, our reflections weren't human anymore. Their eyes were black voids, their mouths stretched open, filled with rows of jagged teeth. Their bodies twitched violently, as if something inside them was trying to get out. Then, it was normal again. But the smiles remained. The man's breathing shallowed. We need to leave. He turned, running his hands along the wall, searching for an exit, anything. I backed away from the mirror, keeping my eyes locked on the reflections. I didn't trust them. Then, they moved. I didn't. But my reflection did. It tilted its head at an unnatural angle, its grin widening far beyond my real mouth. I choked on a breath. Oh my God. The reflection of the man lifted a hand, slowly, deliberately. Then, it pressed its palm against the glass. The second it touched the mirror, the glass cracked. A thin, spidery fracture spread out from its palm, splitting the smooth surface. A deep, resonating hum filled the air, like the entire room was breathing. I stumbled back, my chest tightening with terror. It's breaking. The man turned, his eyes going wide. The reflections weren't just staring anymore, they were pushing. Their hands pressed harder against the glass, the cracks spreading like veins across the mirror. They were trying to get out. The humming grew louder, the air thickened. I grabbed the man's arm. We have to go. He was already moving. We ran, frantically searching the smooth white walls for any kind of exit. The cracks in the mirror spread faster, the surface warping as if it were made of liquid. Then, a low, gurgling laugh echoed through the room. I spun around. Our reflections were laughing, mouths wide, eyes black. Then, they stepped forward, and the glass shattered. I screamed. The man grabbed my wrist, yanking me away from the mirror just as the reflections crawled through. The room collapsed into chaos, the air ripped apart. The humming turned into a deafening roar. I felt something grab me, not the man, something cold, something wrong. Then everything went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious. Minutes? Hours. When I woke up, I was somewhere else. The store's intercom buzzed overhead. The air smelled of cheap plastic and stale popcorn. I opened my eyes. I was lying on the floor of a normal Walmart. Bright, clean, filled with people. Shoppers pushed carts. Employees stocked shelves. It was like nothing had ever happened. I sat up, my heart pounding. The man was gone. So was the white door. So was the mirror. Had it all been a dream? I looked down at my arms. There were deep bruises around my wrists. Something had grabbed me. Something had pulled me through. And then, I heard it. A voice over the intercom. Attention shoppers, the store will be closing in 5 minutes. Please make your way to the exits. I froze. The voice, it was mine. The voice over the intercom was mine. But that was impossible. I stood there, frozen, my mind screaming at me to run. The bright lights, the clean aisles, the sound of beeping registers, everything seemed normal. But it wasn't. I could feel it. Something was watching me. Shoppers passed by, pushing carts filled with everyday groceries, milk, cereal, frozen dinners. A mother walked past, holding her child's hand. The child stared at me, didn't blink. His lips parted slightly, and I saw something dark moving inside his mouth. I looked away. The intercom crackled again. "Attention shoppers, the store is now closed. Please proceed to the nearest exit." That was wrong. The announcement had changed. Before, it said we had 5 minutes. Now? Now it was commanding us to leave. The shoppers around me continued moving as if nothing was wrong. But something inside me knew. They weren't real. They were just going through the motions. Like actors in a play. Aisles stretched endlessly in every direction. No matter which way I turned, I couldn't see an exit. I took a slow, shaky breath. I needed to get out. I started walking toward the front of the store where the automatic doors should be. The shoppers stopped. One by one, they turned toward me. Their eyes were too dark. Their faces were too still. Then, they all smiled. 100 identical empty grins. I stumbled backward. Something was wrong. The intercom buzzed again. "Employees, please escort any remaining customers out of the store." I heard it before I saw it. The sound of heavy, dragging footsteps coming from behind me. I turned and felt my stomach drop. The employees, the ones from before, with their faceless heads, their too long arms, their tattered blue vests, stained with something dark. They were coming for me, their fingers twitched, their bodies moving in that unnatural, jerking way. And worst of all, the man was with them. His face was blank, just smooth, featureless skin, but I knew it was him. The box cutter was still clutched in his hand. "No," I whispered. "This wasn't happening. This wasn't real." But it was. The employees surged forward. I ran. I tore through the aisles, shoving past empty-faced shoppers, knocking over displays. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The store was shifting around me, aisles stretching longer, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. No matter which way I turned, there was no exit. I skidded around a corner and slammed into a mirror. I stumbled back, my reflection staring at me. Not my reflection. It was grinning. My stomach turned. I spun around and found myself surrounded. The employees, the shoppers, the man. They formed a circle around me, closing in. I was trapped. I whirled back to the mirror. There had to be a way out. The reflection raised its hand and pointed to the intercom. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed the intercom receiver, my hands shaking violently. I pressed the button, and I spoke. "The store is open." Silence. The employees froze. The shoppers stopped moving. The entire store shuddered. Then everything began to change. The lights flickered wildly. The aisles shrank back to normal. The intercom buzzed erratically. And the people, they started to scream. Their faces twisted, warped, their bodies contorted. The man fell to his knees, clutching his head. The floor cracked beneath me. The store was collapsing. I had to get out. I turned and ran. This time, the exit was there, the sliding glass doors, wide open. I threw myself through them, and everything went black. I woke up in my car. The sun was rising. I was parked in the Walmart lot. But the store, it was gone. Nothing but an empty lot, as if it had never been there at all. I sat there, shaking, my heart pounding. I checked my phone. No calls, no texts, no proof that anything had happened. But I knew it was real. And then, the intercom buzzed, except it wasn't coming from a speaker, it was coming from my phone. I raised it to my ear, my fingers trembling. A voice spoke, not mine, not the man's, something else. "Attention shoppers. We'll see you again soon." The call ended, and on my phone screen, there was a new location. Another Walmart, open 24/7. I stared at it. I knew what it meant. This wasn't over. And next time, I might not make it out. The Silent Screams, the channel of interesting horror stories. If you are new on this channel, then don't forget to subscribe The Silent Screams and press the bell icon for interesting stories.